Hi, this will be a second short film on the relationship between finger movements and forearm rotation whilst playing trills, and especially fast ones. I'll put a link in the description to the film I posted before, although you don't need to watch that to understand this. Anyway, to summarise briefly, what I'll be saying is exactly why it's a huge problem to have either extremist point of view, whether that means all fingers no forearm rotation or all forearm rotation no fingers. Anyway, so let's talk about probably the most common problem we see in trills, firstly, is when people lock up their forearm. They try to move fingers only. If there's no freedom in the forearm and that's held, I mean, I can understand why people do that. It seems like it would give more control if the arm doesn't move. But it doesn't work, because to rigidify the arm means there's tendons that pass through the wrist. To clench those actually stops these fingers moving freely. They get stuck. So we can't do a good trill from fingers only if we're holding stuff rigid. Now, very commonly, what people will do as a response to this problem is they'll jump to the opposite extreme. They'll say, yeah, stop moving your fingers. Use rotation instead of. They won't say as well as, they'll very often literally say instead of. And for me, this is a major mistake to portray it that way. Now, if I did start off, if I did this as an exercise first, extreme rotation, I could even hold my fingers together and just make sure there's nothing but rotation driving them. It takes a very big amplitude of movement there. But the good thing is that forces the arm to start moving. You can't be locked when you do this. Of course, the problem with that is the faster we go, up to a point we can still do a lot of rotation, but eventually we get to a speed where it has to become mostly finger movements, and the rotation is very limited once we get very fast. It still plays a role. It's not some silly contest where we say, yeah, now it's fingers instead of rotation. We're always going to be looking at some kind of blend that we can tweak. However, the faster we go, the more the fingers are going to contribute to that blend. Otherwise, it simply cannot work. Now, I'll show you exactly why rotation only is not credible at all. Recently, there was someone who insisted he believes that you can literally apply nothing but rotational energy to static fingers that act as nothing but a transmitter. So actually, I challenged him to take a plug and play a fast trill with a plug. Now, he actually did it better than I expected, but I realised actually he was holding it this way. The fingers were on the prongs. I'll demonstrate with this. So, obviously not an amazing trill, but with the fingers on the prongs, you can make it a lot better than it would have been, because these fingers can actually articulate still. Can you see? I'm rotating there, but as I push into each prong, that causes a rotation as I push the prong into the key. So if you want to get a more accurate measure of what rotation alone can really do, hold it very tightly and try to do nothing but turn the forearm. Try the same again. It barely even gets off the ground, barely works at all, or possibly hold it this way is another thing. Try that, try and rock it. You can sort of do it to some degree, but it's incredibly limited, and it's very clear, even through the lifeless plug, if we can get a little bit of finger movement going. Still a rubbish trill, of course, but I can start to get a little bit of speed when the fingers play a role. So really, it's incredibly clear. There's no such thing as a rotation-only based trill, except in a slow tempo. If we go slow, big amplitude of movements, that can make the keys move. If we try and speed that up, we can't sustain that amplitude. The faster we go, the less active rotation drives through the fingers. Anyway, so to summarise that, for a fast trill, it would be accurate to say the fingers play the main role of producing the energy that moves the keys. No problem with saying that. We just have to add the caveat. It doesn't mean there's no rotation. Remember, if I go back to locking my arm against rotation, it doesn't work while the fingers jam up. So the minimum, even for the most extreme finger-based trill, is to have rotational freedom. If the arm is responsive, it can still be quite effective. And of course you can also add active rotation as a top-up. No argument against that whatsoever. If I move the fingers well, then I can try to use a bit more rotational drive. If you want a very loud trill, it's quite good to have both finger movements and a little bit of drive from the forearm can top up the energy. Perfectly credible. It's just this idea of rotation only. It doesn't mean anything. If we have rotation only, it has to be huge. There's no small version of rotation only. And the reason this is so important, if someone plays really well, they can believe anything. They can believe their toes make the energy if they play well. What does it matter? Just do whatever you do that works if it's already working. The problem is not everyone has good trills. So we need to be clear. Even if someone's trying to do it only with their fingers, if we tell them it's rotation only, what happens then? Okay, initially as an exercise, that's great. just get the freedom, start off with that, no problem at all as an exercise. But if we have that person literally believe that the way to go fast is to keep the finger static, they're going to have problems the same way as I do there. Because I never had finger instincts that way. I can play a good trill now, but I never had those instincts. When I pretended you could literally do nothing but rotation, completely motionless fingers passing the rotation, just the same way as the lifeless prongs of a plug, I could never trill well because it's not real. Nobody can actually do that. The only time that seems to work is when people have very good finger instincts, and then the rotation can trigger those instincts. Anyway, so I hope that gives a clear sense of why we should always work in blends and balances. They may be heavily tweaked in one direction. That's perfectly fine. And we can do lots of experiments. But the thing we never want to do is get stuck in this conceptual idea. Rotation is supposed to be there instead of fingers. Fingers are supposed to be there instead of rotation. Play around with the blends, play around the balances. We can say for a fact that the faster you go, the more it leans towards finger movements. But even then, we're never throwing out rotation. Everything we do, we're going to work in blending and understanding relationships of these, not making a silly contest between factors, as if we have to smear the other one to promote one thing. It doesn't work that way.